Great. All right, hello everyone. My name is Lauren Chadwick, and I'm going to be presenting the differential diagnosis as well as the cultural considerations for non-suicidal self-injury. And as a quick preface, I'm presenting via video today because my sister is getting married and I'm there at the wedding by the time all will be watching this. So just quick context. But yeah, let's jump into differential diagnosis. So non-suicidal self-injury can happen under any diagnosis. It can be difficult to separate it out because anyone, regardless of diagnosis type, can struggle with non-suicidal self-injury. People without other mental health diagnoses can also engage with NSSI, so you don't have to have a diagnosis to engage with it, or you can have a diagnosis and that can be pretty much anything, right? And according to Lu 2023, 63.82 of respondents with NSSI across the lifespan had at least one psychiatric disorder. So a large amount of people who struggle with NSSI um, also at the lifespan level had one psychiatric disorder as well. And so NSSI can be linked to another psychiatric disorder or it can be simultaneous, like a co-occurring issue. Someone with OCD can do NSSI. Someone with schizophrenia can do NSSI. Someone with borderline PD can do NSSI as well. NSSI may be a symptom of a disorder even, and for example, it's part of the criteria for borderline personality disorder. Because NSSI and other psychiatric conditions are entrenched in one another, it's difficult to say if NSSI is not part of another psychiatric disorder. More research needs to be done in this area of studying non-suicidal self-injury. In page 923 of section 3 of the DSM, we learned that NSSI has a code, and these are proposed criteria for NSSI. They center around a 5-day or more period, so meaning the disturbance, the non-suicidal self-injury has to be occurring for more than 5 days. And the biggest thing here is inducing pain. Expectations of relief, solving interpersonal difficulties, and that kind of means, just like I'm having interpersonal difficulties, so I'm gonna get relief through that, through NSSI. And then also having a positive state, being either cognitive or affective, um, because views are all things that are indicative of NSSI. The ICD-11 also notes that code MB23.E, being the code for non-suicidal self-injury, indicates minor physical harm is done, and that's a direct quote from that. These two clinical definitions of NSSI mean that they're still developing an understanding of whether or not NSSI is a diagnosis on its own or if it just fits with diagnoses and it kind of goes in like a puzzle piece, or if it's by itself standalone. A final point for this is that the parameters of NSSI when it comes to psychosis, um, and when it comes to psychosis specifically, researchers Hooley et al. Postulate that if a person loses contact with reality, are they really doing non-suicidal self-injury? It's important consideration because a person who's going through psychosis, their intent may be not to harm themselves, but to maybe harm something else that they're experiencing through psychosis, and that's important consideration. And then another example of this is quote unquote meth mites. This is a phenomenon I found during doing research on NSSI, and it's kind of a differential diagnosis consideration because there's a phenomenon where someone who uses large amounts of methamphetamine may pick at their skin. The large amounts of methamphetamine, um, a lot of people report like, kind of like bugs under the skin kind of sensation, and they feel the need to pick at their skin. And so this is important to NSSI because not only can meth induce psychosis as well, but it may or may not be true non-suicidal self-injury in the kind of point that we know it to be from the DSM criteria, for example. So that's just two important considerations. Okay. All right, so cultural considerations. So one of the first things I thought of for cultural appropriate NSSI was tattoos and piercings. This would be an example of culturally accepted form of non-suicidal self-injury. I couldn't find much on NSSI and culture or religion, and like those two things kind of, or three things kind of intertwined. I couldn't find much religious practices that use NSSI, part of a ritual or a rite or something like that. Something that came to mind for me was fasting, being the denial of food for religious reasons. This, of course, shouldn't be pathologized, as it is part of someone's religious practices. And just because there isn't a large body of research on non-suicidal self-injury and religion, that doesn't mean that there aren't practices that incorporate NSSI that, we're just not aware of or just isn't in research or something like that. So, if this does come up and it's part of someone's religion or spirituality to do this, just take it into a consideration that it maybe it's not appropriate to pathologize it. Right. So, something else here is that Eastern societies have a different viewpoint of non-suicidal self-injury than, say, Western societies. There's research to back this, as Xiao and Chen, 2022 and 2021, note that Eastern societies oftentimes highly stigmatize non-suicidal self-injury and is seen as an act of rebellion against the majority collective. It is important to keep this in mind when working with clients of this background, as this is added pressure for them, as people from individualistic Western societies may not be aware of. And then age is another risk factor or cultural group for an NSSI, specifically being an adolescent. Age is almost a risk factor for an NSSI. According to Mullenkamp et al. 2019, adolescents are now facing adversity in this way, and they're one of the age groups with the highest usage of NSSI. This can pave the way for addiction for a later issue. And then lastly, women report more than men, according to Lutz et al. And other studies as well. Women self-report doing it more than men, it being NSSI. This is important because we as counselors need to be aware of how women talk about their issues versus how men talk about their issues, right? And those two things may be different. Let's et al. Tells us that men and women may respond to distress differently, and that it's important to keep that in mind when looking for warning signs of non-suicidal self-injury, as well as non-suicidal self-injury addiction and gender differences. So they just might be expressing things differently. Thank you.